Before we jump right into the stories, I just want to take the time and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to hopefully aid you in your sleep. This video is designed to be as minimalist as possible, with only a black screen, myself, and, of course, most importantly, you. So, if this video has helped you in your sleep, please let me know down in the comments below. It'll let me know that I'm doing something right. It'll also convince my wife that I should keep doing it. No, I'm just kidding. Anyways, without further ado, please sit back, relax, and enjoy. So, this happened about a year ago, and I'm still pretty shaken up by the whole event. And I thought I'd tell my story here. I live in the UK, and in autumn it gets dark at around 4 p.m. There was a school autumn break that week, so all the kids were at home. That means my girlfriend's brother was home too. I'd been with her for a year, and her family knew me pretty well, and her brother enjoyed my company. She'd recently been pretty stressed out. Her parents were going out across the country for the day, so she had to look after her brother, but I thought that I'd give her a day off to herself so she can just cool off. I asked her parents if it would be okay if I looked after their son for the day instead, and they agreed. So I came around 8 a.m. and they let me in before they set off. My girlfriend's brother woke up about an hour later, and she followed shortly thereafter. We went out for breakfast at a local cafe together and went back to her house when we were done. Once I dropped her off, I took her brother to the park. We got there at about 2 p.m. The place was completely empty by 4 p.m. I texted my girlfriend and told her we'd be home in a bit, and she said okay. I'm gonna be honest, I completely lost track of time. Me and her brother were having fun being the only two in the park. It was almost pitch black at that point, so I was using my phone as a flashlight. A notification popped on my screen, and it was my girlfriend asking where we were. I responded, oops, and that we're coming home now, and told her brother we had to go. He sighed and asked if we could go down the slide, and I said yes. Before I went down, I knew what the park looked like. There were streetlights all around, benches everywhere, some trees, and places for the kids to play. When I came out of the slide, there was something weird. A man had appeared out of nowhere and was standing beneath one of the streetlights. He had a trench coat on and a beanie hat. I immediately got my girlfriend's brother behind me and called out to the man with a friendly "hi there." I got a response. He started groaning. I noticed he was swaying back and forth in the light. He had his mouth open, drooling with a blank look in his eyes. This man made me feel really uneasy. I picked little bro up and kept checking on the guy the entire time. I was walking down the path for about 2 minutes, periodically checking behind me, and thought I was in a clear, but I wasn't. I was on a straight stretch of a path with lots of streetlights when I saw him again. He was standing beneath one and looking up at it. He was playing with something in his hands. I looked closer and realized it was a damn knife. I kept walking and walking, checking behind me constantly. My girlfriend's little brother was so scared he had his head tucked to his chest. I noticed that the guy seemed to be moving to new streetlights whenever I turned around. Initially, I thought it was my eyes playing tricks on me, but I started counting them and realized 2 streetlights behind him had only turned into 5. I could faintly hear the groaning noise. He was occasionally moaning as well. I picked up the pace a bit and turned a corner, getting into the last stretch of street before I got to my girlfriend's house. That was when I heard him behind the row of bushes. That moaning noise sounded angry, and I heard his heavy footsteps pounding down the path. The man was running. I immediately broke into sprints and didn't stop until I turned into an alleyway. at the front of the streets and got behind my girlfriend's house. There's a big bush there, so I crouched down behind that and spammed her phone with messages to open the back gate. I hugged her brother close until she opened it for us and got us in quickly. It felt like years. I went to the front of the house and had it confirmed that I'd managed to shake him. He was now in the street, circling where I'd been, outside of the alleyway just moments ago. He was still moaning. He had that knife in his hand still. He started kicking people's bins over. I called the police immediately, but he was gone by the time they arrived, and as far as I know, they never found him. There was a similar incident near the area a few months ago. I saw in a local Facebook group, but I don't think anything came of that either. Her parents thanked me for keeping her son safe and didn't hold any ill will against me for the situation. He went back to normal pretty much the day afterwards, but he still has nightmares about the event when my country isn't in lockdown. Funny enough, I'm still allowed to look after him with my girlfriend, but we haven't been to that park ever since, and I still check over my shoulder and break into a cold sweat every time I'm alone in the street. A few years ago, I was renting a house in Northern California. The neighborhood was just outside the suburbs. It seemed like the perfect balance of having space and having nice neighbors close enough to not feel isolated. The area had no streetlights, so it was very dark at night, especially if there were clouds blocking the moonlight. It didn't bother me though. It made my little house feel even more quaint on the dark nights. I got home from work one day in midwinter. It was a cloudy night, so pulling up to my house, I saw only my headlights and the front porch light illuminated. When I got out of my car, I caught a whiff of cigarette smoke. That was odd, as I never smelled that before around that house. I didn't see anyone nearby, so I ignored it and went inside. I had just got off of a shift with a few hours of overtime, so I felt pretty tired. Even though it wasn't even 7 yet, I decided to take a shower and call it a night. I woke up sometime later, sure that I had heard a noise inside my house. I wasn't worried right away because my friend would sometimes stop by to use my shower after work. I even gave him a spare key so he could stop by even if I wasn't home. He would always text me to let me know beforehand though, and I hadn't heard my phone go off. I reached over to my bedside table and picked up my cell phone to see if my friend had sent me a text. The bright light from my phone's screen and number pad blinded me a bit. These were the days before phones had a light sensor that would dim the screen in the dark, and this particular phone was so bright I could use it as a flashlight. Through squinted eyes, I could make out that it was 9 something, but I couldn't tell if I had an unread text or not. I set my phone aside and called my friend's name. There were a couple of seconds of silence before I heard loud falls as someone started running through the bottom floor of my house. I leapt out of bed and ran to the closet. They were already up the stairs by the time I had opened the door and stepped inside. That house had 3 rooms upstairs, 2 bedrooms on either side of the hallway, and one I was in, and a spare, and a bathroom at the end. The bedroom doors were both closed, but the bathroom door was cracked open. I could hear whoever was in my house thunder down the hallway past my door and go into the bathroom. Thank God he did. That gave me enough time to open the attic and access in the ceiling of my closet and hoist myself up. I had just started to lift myself up when the person ran back out of the bathroom. My feet were barely inside the attic when my bedroom door burst open. I heard footsteps run inside, into my room and stop. When they didn't see me in that room, they ran back to the hallway and into the other room, which just had boxes stacked in a corner, some weights, and a table where I painted my miniature models. I guess they decided that if someone were hiding, it would be in the bedroom because they charged back into the room and turned on the lights. A moment later, the closet door was ripped open. I was crouched in my attic, just a foot or so away from the access, so I could try to stop them if they tried to climb up. From my vantage point, all I could see was from about their knee down. They were wearing dirty blue jeans and frayed cuffs and worn work boots. After a few seconds of looking in the closet, they stepped away and I heard a loud crash come from my room, followed by a scream of frustration and anger. That scream was the most unnerving part of the incident for me. It reminded me far too much of my stepfather, who would scream in a similar way when he lost his temper. He would eventually be put into a mental hospital for several mental disorders that resulted in erratic and violent tendencies. The man in the house ran back down the stairs. I heard crashes and clatters as things were thrown around and furniture was knocked over. I stayed crouched in the attic. I left my cell phone when I ran for the closet, and I wasn't certain I would climb down without him hearing. After some time, the noises stopped. I started counting slowly. When I reached 1,000, I decided it was safe enough to climb down and call the police. The first thing I noticed when I exited the closet was the intruder had flipped my bed over. I assume in an attempt to find me. That was the loud noise I had heard after he stepped away from the closet. I couldn't find my cell phone, so I went to the landline by my bed and called the police. I waited in my room until I heard them call out from downstairs. The first floor was a mess, but I had expected that. Chairs had been knocked over and the sofa had been flipped. All the books, pictures, and knickknacks I had on my shelves were strewn across the floor. The cupboards in the kitchen had been opened and all the boxed and canned foods had been thrown to the ground. As far as I could tell, though, the only thing missing was a single knife out of the wooden block in my kitchen. The police checked the house from top to bottom. They found that the side door had been forced open by something like a crowbar. They also found a few cigarette butts along my fence line, along with foil and an empty pen tube, which the police said is often used to smoke meth. So, they think he had been watching my house for a while. I realized that he must have been out there smoking a cigarette when I got home. They collected up the evidence and told me I should stay with family or friends that night and get that door fixed as soon as possible. I opted to just not sleep. I moved a shelf over to block the broken door and spent the next couple of hours cleaning things up. I would often go to the window with a flashlight and shine it along the fence line where the police found the cigarette butts and foil, but I didn't see anything. The next day, I called to have the door fixed and motion lights installed at the back and sides of the house. I ran a phone cable up to the attic and added a landline. I never wanted to be stuck up there without a phone again. Nothing else happened at that house, though. I lived there another 3 years without an incident. One more precaution I took was practicing getting out of my bed and going to my closet and climbing up into the attic as quietly as possible. I even kept at it when I moved, except now I go to a crawl space at the back of the closet instead of the attic. I try not to think about what would have happened if I had been a bit slower getting to the attic or if he hadn't gone into the bathroom at the end of the hallway first. Don't Google yourself. Why? Because you may not like what you find. One day, I was bored and decided to search for my own name on Google. I have quite a rare name, so I didn't expect to find many results. Imagine how surprised I was when I came across a website that had my full name in the domain. It was literally my name in the domain. When I clicked the link, it brought me to a message board. I looked at the profile for the website owner and find out that the person was the same age as me and had the same hobbies and interests. There weren't any posts on the message board, but I was intrigued, so I saved it in my favorites. It was about a month later. That's when I went back to the website. This time, it had more content. There were some diary entries, mostly random things like the weather was nice today or I'm so bored at work, things of that nature. However, as time went on, I began to notice more and more coincidences. The person lived in the same city as I did. It struck me as rather strange that two people with the same exact rare name would be living in the same city at the same time. At one point, I noticed that the contents of the diary were quite similar to my own life. One day, I went to a baseball game, and when I checked the website that evening, I found out that the owner on that site had gone to the same ball game. At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, tens of thousands of people in the city supported the same baseball team. It began to seem like much more than a simple coincidence. Whenever I would check the website, I would notice little biographical details that seemed too close for comfort. For example, the owner mentioned their pet dog, and the dog's name was the same as the dog I had when I was a child. The website owner posted a picture of their car. It was the same model of a car I had been driving when I was in college. They talked about eating at a certain restaurant. It was that same exact restaurant I had gone to all the time when I was working at my previous job. One day, when I looked at the message board, people had written messages to the owner saying, "Happy birthday." That day, it was my birthday as well. I decided to write on the message board for the first time just out of curiosity. I was going to wish the owner a happy birthday and tell them we had the same name. However, when I tried to write something, I realized that there was nowhere to type your message. It wasn't a message board at all, just a static page. That's odd, I thought to myself. In other words, whoever owned the website had gone to a lot of trouble to make it seem as if it was an interactive site, as if there were other people posting on it, when in actual fact, all the content must have been created by the owner. Why on earth would someone do that? I wondered. I decided to send an email to the owner. It read, "Hi there. Believe it or not, we both share the same name. It's nice to meet you." It was just a friendly email. The next day, when I tried to look at the website, I discovered that it was gone. It seemed like it had just been deleted. Then I opened my mailbox. There was one reply. When I looked at it, a chill ran down my spine. It just read, "Found you." It was a chilly October night, the kind that whispered of the coming winter. I've always been a social butterfly, so when my friend Alex invited me to a small get-together at a new friend's place, I didn't hesitate. The more the merrier, I always say. The address led us to an old, slightly run-down house in the outskirts of town. It had a peculiar aura, like it was stuck in time. We were greeted by our host, Tom, a tall guy with a friendly smile but distant eyes. The house inside was surprisingly cozy, filled with antiques and old photos. The evening started off great. We laughed, shared stories, and enjoyed a few drinks. But as the night grew older, the atmosphere began to shift. Tom's story took a dark turn, speaking of tragedies and horrors that he claimed happened in the very house we were in. I thought he was just trying to spook us, but there was a sincerity in his voice that was very uneasy. Then, things got really weird. Tom insisted we play a game he called Truth of the House. It was like Truth or Dare, but with a twist. The truths were all about revealing our deepest fears. Everyone hesitated, but not wanting to spoil the fun, we played along. one by one, we shared our fears. When it was Tom's turn, he revealed something chilling. My biggest fear, he began in a slow, deliberate tone, is that one of you will try to leave before you learn the truth about this very house. The room felt silent. It was then when I noticed the doors were locked from the outside. That's when I started to panic. Alex tried to call for help, but there was no signal. Tom's demeanor changed. The friendly host was gone, replaced by someone or something menacing. He started to tell us the true story of the house, a tale of lost souls, betrayal, and revenge. The story was terrifying, not just for its content, but for the way Tom told it, as if he was reliving it. We were captives in his twisted narrative. I can't tell you how, but eventually we found a way to escape. The night ended with police lights and a lot of unanswered questions. The house was investigated, but Tom was nowhere to be found. They say he was a drifter, no real identity or history. That night changed me. I'm more cautious now, especially about meeting new people. I learned the hard way that you never really know what secrets others might be hiding, or what stories a house might hold. This happened when I was around 17 years old, and is still happening now. At 17, I felt lost in the world and stuck in a job I disliked with work colleagues that didn't like me. This had to do with my accent, as I was quite well-spoken, so they thought I was a rich kid. It all started on a Friday after work. The factory I worked in had a half day on Fridays, so I would just spend the rest of the day wandering around the city I lived in. It had been a tough day of relentless mocking, and I was reaching my breaking point. I went around the city looking for a new job. I visited the police recruitment center and even the International Red Cross. I just wanted to get away from it all. After a few hours, I had a bag full of career pamphlets and still no idea what to do with my life. I turned a corner and immediately saw a sign sitting in front of me. I can remember it so vividly now. It said, "Free personality test. Are you curious about yourself? Well, come in." I then looked up at the building, and in a big fancy sign outside it said, "The Church of Scientology." Now, before I continue, yes, I already knew about Scientology. However, I had a morbid curiosity about it. I had heard all the horror stories and goings on inside the church, but Tom Cruise was my favorite actor, and he seemed to have his life sorted out pretty good. My famous last words were right there. So, I went inside. I was immediately greeted by a very nice lady. She asked me about how I was doing and what she could do for me today. I asked if I could speak to somebody about the church and the personality test. She smiled and pretty much told me to have a seat and that someone would speak to me soon. After about a minute, I was introduced to an older man named Alan, and he was the head of my city Scientology center. Alan took me to a small room to talk privately. When we entered, I immediately noticed the large picture of L. Ron Hubbard on the wall. We sat down and genuinely had a nice talk. I told him about how I was unhappy about where my life was going. I told him about how I wanted to leave, plus all the trouble I was having at work. He seemed genuinely concerned for me, and I felt like he wanted to help. After a while of talking, I agreed to do the personality test. He gave me the test and left the room, saying to give the test to the receptionist after I had finished. 2 hours later, I finished it. Not joking. That's really how long it took. I handed it in to the receptionist, and she told me it would take some time to process. In the meantime, Alan had told her to take me to the private cinema and show me a film. I thought it was just going to be some old room in the back with a TV on the wall, but no. They did indeed have a private cinema. It could seat around 50 people and had a large screen in the front. It did feel a bit weird just being by myself in a cinema owned by Scientology, but I bet that hasn't happened to many people. Or maybe it has. Anyway, I sat down and they played me the film. It was about 30 minutes long and consisted of a narrator explaining those strange feelings you get sometimes, with some mediocre acting following along. I remember a section about how much you doubt yourself, knowing you have locked the door but going back to check it multiple times. At one point, the film showed how a past events that happened to your mother while she was pregnant with you could affect your life in a negative way. An example would be your mother was sick on a flight, so you're scared of flying. I also vaguely remember about rotten eggs and how an event involving them can hurt you. I know it sounds absurd, but in some ways, the film really made sense to me. When the film was done, I was taken to Alan's office and he told me about my results. He told me I was extremely depressed, one of the most unmotivated people he had even met, lacking cognitive thinking, and that I was a waste of talent. Now, this made me very upset, but Alan said he could help me. He gave me about 4 books and a DVD. He told me to read the books and watch the film before my course. I asked, what about the course, or what course was there? And Alan told me he had signed me up to do a course at the center. He convinced me that if I didn't do this course, that my life would soon spiral out of control. He made me hand over quite a lot of money for the course and said I would receive an email about the course, which was in a month's time. I left the center, ran home, and immediately started reading the books I was given. This happened all over the weekend. I had basically locked myself in my room and did nothing but read and reread those books and watch the DVD over and over again. Over the next week, I began taking notes about myself and my family. I emailed Alan with the questions and concerns. I started resenting my mother for my life. I began to think she was the problem, and everything bad that happened to me was the result of her. I started to treat her badly, swearing at her, and did the best I could to ignore her. When I emailed Alan about my mother, he told me that if she was the catalyst for my problems, then maybe I should consider disconnecting from her. And I took that BS seriously. I made plans to totally leave her out of my life. The week before my course, I developed some kind of a God complex towards everyone around me. What I read in those books told me what I could become. I saw everyone in my family as below me. I really became a truly spiteful person. Just days before my course, I was confronted by my mother and father. They said they were concerned about me and they searched my room. My dad took out all of my Scientology books and the DVD. I was outraged. I screamed and cursed at my parents. I said horrible, wicked things to them. I told them how I was going to leave them and how I never wanted to see them again. Hours of arguing back and forth, tears and crying. However, in the end, they did convince me that the church was a bad place. They said if I was so miserable at work, I should have told them. And that is true. I didn't tell them. I didn't tell anyone. To this day, in fact, I still can't believe I didn't say anything to them, how I was feeling or what I was doing, but instead went to Scientology. That night, after the arguing had stopped, they sat me down and comforted me. I really couldn't believe it. After the way I treated them for the past 3 weeks, they still cared for me. The next day, I emailed Alan and told him I wouldn't be coming back to the church. He quickly got back to me asking why, asking if it was my family and if I was being forced to not go. However, I ignored him. The emails I revived in the next few weeks were mad. He told me stuff like I should leave my family now and I could stay at the church. He tried to convince me that it was all because of my mother. He even emailed me to say something along the lines of, he won't be surprised if he reads in the papers that I was found dead by. I'm sure you know what I meant. And he crossed the line there, but I just kept ignoring him. The strangest email I got was one in all binary code, like 0011011011. I used the binary code translator, but it all came back as mixed up letters and numbers. None of it made sense. I eventually blocked him. However, it still hasn't stopped. About 2 or 3 times a year, I will get an email from the church. It's either asking how I am or asking about my family. When I get them, I immediately block the email address. They just keep coming. It's always someone new saying they heard about my case and they were worried about me. The whole reason I'm writing this is because I just got one the other day and I thought it would make a good warning. Please, I beg of you, do not go to a Church of Scientology center. If they can make me into a spitefully degenerate in just a few hours, then what can they do with a person in a few months or a year? If anyone has any idea how to block an entire religion/cult from my email, then please let me know. And if you're lost in life, sad or upset, then please talk to your family, friends, or even a doctor. When you are down, don't let others make you into a monster. Take it from me. After this event, I got help and I'm a happy, confident person now. Oh, and Alan, if you're reading this, you made me into a monster, so for your sake, let's not meet again. I had an incredibly frightening experience last night and wanted to know if anyone else here had a similar encounter. So, last night, I was at our classmate's house working on a group project we had due the next day. I live in an apartment in the town where our university is located, and my classmate lives at his parents' house, which is in the foothills just outside of town. In order to get to his house, you have to drive along a relatively secluded and narrow 2-lane road for about 5 to 6 miles. We started working on the project at about 6 p.m., and I ended up hanging around for a while after we had finished our working. So I left his house pretty late at about 11 and started down the road back towards town. I didn't realize how tough it would be to navigate the road at night. There were no streetlights and the road was unkept and riddled with potholes. On top of this, I had no cell service, so I had to drive very slowly to make sure I didn't blow out one of my tires since I used my spare a couple of weeks ago. I figured I was about 3 miles from the house when I rounded a tight corner and saw a pickup truck with a camper shell parked diagonally across the road. The manner in which it was parked completely impeded my path, and I couldn't drive around it because there was a gully on both sides of the road. The only way for me to go at this point was backward, where there was a pull-off that I could use to turn my car around. At first, I couldn't see inside the cab, but when I turned on my high beams, I saw there was a man slouched over in the driver's seat, his head resting against the steering wheel as if he had been knocked out from a bad accident. I immediately sensed something was wrong, and the way his car was just coincidentally come to rest in a position that totally blocked the road was a big red flag for me. I heard stories of people playing dead in the road as a way to lure unsuspecting people out there. I decided not to be a part of that and elected to go back to my classmate's house and explain what was going on. I threw my car into reverse and kept my eyes darting back and forth between my rearview mirror and the truck. I looked and saw that I was almost to the pull-off where I could turn around. When I looked back, my heart skipped about 5 beats. The man who had been slouched over in the driver's seat was now walking at my car at a hurried pace, while a few other men jumped out of the camper shell and started moving towards me as well. I panicked and accelerated backwards into the pull-off, which messed up the undercarriage of my car pretty bad. As I put it into drive, the guy was already at my passenger side door tugging on a handle, which, thank the Lord, was locked. I only caught a brief glimpse of him, but his face appeared to be scabbed and leathery, definitely a meth head or some sort of drug abuser. I sped away and didn't slow down at all until I reached the house, constantly checking my rearview mirror to see if they were following. Thankfully, they didn't tail me, and when I reached the house, I explained what had happened to my classmate and we all called the cops. I was grateful that my buddy's parents were kind enough to let me spend the night. They didn't find anyone on the road matching the description, but I filed an incident report and they told me they would be on the lookout for similar vehicles and suspicious activity. But holy crap, I'm still shook up over it. I keep getting the same adrenaline rush I got when I saw the guy charging me whenever I think about it. Please, share similar experiences if you've had one, as I would appreciate a good read or a good discussion to help clear my headspace. Once, I decided to venture into the unknown depths of an online chat forum, a place where strangers from all corners of the world gathered to share their stories. It was late at night, and the silence of my apartment only fueled my curiosity. The forum was an eclectic mix of personalities, each hidden beyond intriguing usernames. Among them, one particular individual, going by the alias Shadow Whisperer, caught my attention. Our conversations began harmlessly, discussing mundane topics like music and movies. However, as days turned into weeks, a sense of unease started to creep in. Shadow Whisperer began sharing darker, more personal stories, tales that chilled me to my bone. They spoke of isolated places, forbidden rituals, and encounters that defied explanations. Their words, laced with a sinister undertone, seemed to echo through my mind long after our chats ended. Ignoring the red flags, I found myself drawn deeper into the unsettling world. Shadow Whisperer proposed a real-life meeting, a chance to explore an abandoned asylum known for its haunted history. Despite every instinct screaming against it, I agreed. The night of the meeting was shrouded in a thick fog. As I approached the decrepit structure, the air felt charged with a foreboding energy. I waited, but Shadow Whisperer was nowhere to be found and nowhere to be seen. Instead, I heard whispers, faint and discordant, emanating from the bowels of the asylum. Driven by an inexplicable compulsion, I decided to go inside. The building was a labyrinth of decaying corridors and crumbling rooms. The whispers grew louder, guiding me deeper. I stumbled upon a room, the walls covered in archaic symbols and old photographs of people I didn't recognize. Their eyes scratched out, though. A sense of dread washed over me as I realized these were probably past visitors lured by the Shadow Whisperer. In that moment, a chilling revelation struck me. Shadow Whisperer was not a person but an entity, a malevolent force that thrived on fear and curiosity. I turned to flee, but the corridors twisted and turned, disorienting me. The whispers turned to mocking laughter, echoing through the empty halls. I wandered for what felt like hours, each turn leading me back to the same room. That's when desperation set in, and I feared I would become another forgotten face on the wall. Then, as suddenly as it all began, I found myself outside the asylum, looming ominously over me. The experience left me with an unshakable paranoia and a vow to never again delve into the unknown realms of online strangers. The dangers lurking within the shadows of anonymity are far too real, and some mysteries are best left undiscovered. I apologize in advance since I'm not a good writer, but I'll do my best to share my experience here. To better paint the picture, here's a description of myself at the time of this incident. 5'5", 26-year-old woman, medium length bleached blonde hair, curvy 175 pounds, wearing black high-waisted tights and a pink crop top. 3 years ago, I was walking home late at night from my friend's house. It was dark, and at the time I lived in a rough part of a large city. I've had many sketchy situations that I've gotten myself out of, so I guess I felt sort of invincible, like nothing truly scary could ever happen to me. When I walk alone, I always stay very alert and aware of my surroundings for my own safety, just in case, About halfway home and roughly 10 minutes to my apartment, I noticed the van started tailing me. I was used to this since in my city it's very common for a young woman in a rough area to get propositioned for sex. It's embarrassing how desensitizing to this I was. I did my usual and crossed the road so that I would be walking beside the traffic heading in the other direction. I wasn't scared, just annoyed. The van then turned down a side street, then back onto the main road I was on and pulled up to me. At this point, I still wasn't scared. Again, this has happened so many times, and it never mattered if I was wearing something that showed more skin or if I was wearing a winter coat zipped from just below my chin all the way down to my ankles. That area is notorious for this type of activity. I decided to be more firm and told the person sternly that I'm not interested. I noticed there were two men in the van. They looked almost identical and may have been twins or brothers or something. Both men had a very, very dark complexion, dark eyes, and short, dark hair. The van didn't move. I was super annoyed and crossed the road again to get away. At this point, I figured this would be enough for them to start following me. But they didn't. They kept circling back every time I crossed the road. I've never had to put that much effort into getting a horny pervert to leave me alone. This is when I started feeling unsafe. They zipped by me at the speed the traffic was flowing in, and I yelled for them to screw off. I thought it was finally worked. It had been 3 minutes and I hadn't seen the van, so I thought I was in the clear. Just in case, I pulled my phone out and was getting ready to call my sister that I lived with. Just then, though, the van pulled up to me very quickly, and before I could even blink, one of the men jumped out of the van, opened the back door, and approached me quickly in an aggressive manner, as if he was about to scoop me up and throw me into the vehicle. The traffic in that area is very inconsistent. It was dead, and I imagine that is what they were waiting for. Just as the man was about to place his hands on me, I tilted my phone and said, "You're being filmed in my live video chat." I gave my friends your license plate number and the police had been notified. I was so scared, but I didn't let that show. I stayed as calm as I could. The man paused like he was considering if I was bluffing or telling the truth, so I tilted the phone more as if to give the fake audience a better look at him. He then jumped into the van and they sped off. I've never been the same since that night. I'm afraid of walking alone now, even in the daytime. Stay safe out there. And to the two creeps in a van, let's not ever meet. I hope karma finds you both soon. I still shudder when I think about that night I met him. It was a typical Friday evening, and I was walking back from a friend's house. The streets of my small town were eerily quiet, but I was used to it and felt safe in the familiarity of my surroundings. I was halfway home when I heard footsteps behind me. They were slow and deliberate. I glanced back and saw a man in a dark hoodie. His face was obscured. Thinking he was just another pedestrian, I quickened my pace, but so did his footsteps. My heart started to race. Every time I sped up, the footsteps would follow suit. I decided to cross the street, and to my horror, he did the same. That's when I started to panic. I didn't want to lead this stranger to where I lived, so I took a bit of a detour, hoping to lose him. I cut through a series of alleys, but he was always there, just a few paces behind. At one point, I thought about confronting him, but the fear gripped my reality. The man's presence was menacing, and the way he moved was just unnerving. He never called out or tried to approach me, but his silent pursuit was terrifying. Finally, I saw the lights of a late-night convenience store and bolted towards it. I burst in, gasping for air, and explained the situation to the cashier. The man in the hoodie had just stopped outside, staring through the store's window. The cashier immediately called the police, but before they arrived, the man vanished into the night. The police searched the area, but found no one. They told me it was just probably some prank, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. For weeks after, I was paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder. I never saw the man again, but the fear he instilled in me lingered. It was a grim reminder that even in the most familiar places, danger could be just a few steps behind you. This occurred in 2017, and it is 100% true. Due to a multitude of factors, including a recent death of a close friend, I was unbearably depressed at this time in my life. For that reason, my family flew across the country to visit me in LA, where I lived. We thought it would be nice to visit Catalina Island. When we arrived, it became apparent to us that it was the off-season. It was late November, the weather was cold, and as a result, the island was nearly empty besides locals and a few straggling tourists such as ourselves. Our first priority was to ditch our luggage so we could explore the island, so we immediately checked into our motel, though that word hardly does the place justice. I call it a motel because all the doors to the rooms exited to the outside, but in actuality, our room was one of 20 to 30 quaint guest house-looking buildings arranged in sort of a horseshoe shape. The entrance to the motel was essentially one of the points of this horseshoe, and if you walked dead straight, you'd reach the room we were given. So, from our room, one path led back to the streets, and the other further into the secluded maze of the rooms. Stay with me now. After a day of exploring and having just finished dinner, it was time for the cold, dark walk back to the room. Catalina Island is a decent distance from the mainland, and let me just say, it's dark. It gets really dark. Similarly dark was my headspace after the dinner conversation took a left-hand turn and my overwhelming depression got the best of me. I pulled my black hoodie tighter over my freezing ears and walked ahead of my parents to the hotel room, telling them I just needed to go to sleep. And I did immediately. Depression sometimes makes that easy. I was already losing consciousness as they entered after me, drifting off without so much as a good night. I then woke up to my mom saying my name, a harsh whisper. The room had two beds, my parents' bed closer to the door and mine. Further in my room, my mom's voice cut through the silence again. She sounded concerned for me. I didn't blame her, considering my mental state at the time. Groggy, I rolled over. As my eyes adjusted to the dim moonlight coming in through the curtains, I saw her turn to face me. She was surprised to see me in my bed. Her eyes got wide. If I'm in my bed, who was she talking to? We both looked back to where she was previously, looking to see a hooded figure in all black standing over their bed. I know this is Let's Not Meet, and you are reading this knowing a creepy thing is going to happen. It's in the title. But understand how horrifically startling it is to be on an island in the middle of the ocean and wake up to see a hooded stranger looming over you. This moment seemed to last forever. Life isn't like movies, where characters unleash a blood-curdling scream. Sometimes the only thing that comes out is something panicked and guttural. My mom's words became low and severe as she said my dad's name in a dire voice I've never heard her use before. Then, the hooded figure did something so bizarre and unsettling. It didn't advance towards us, but instead crouched in the corner near where it stood. The way it crouched was so absolutely unexpected, even in regards to the already unexpected situation, that it terrified me. It seemed animalistic. I knew two things. The hooded figure had been standing over us sleeping, and it's not acting in any sort of way that I can understand. As opposed to the infinite moments of this figure standing over us mere seconds ago, the series of events that unfolded when my hulking ex-military dad woke up happened in an instant. Suddenly, we were out the door, not knowing which way the intruder went. My mom was screaming. My dad was running down one of the paths of the horseshoe further into the hotel, shouting. I ran down the other path towards the street. When I got there, not a sign of the intruder, but it became suspiciously quiet behind me. I ran back to the room to find my dad quietly walking back, his head low. He gets really close to me and I hear him say it's a kid. Some young teen, tall and lanky as I am in my 20s, wearing all black, including a black hoodie, went into the wrong room, our room. The one time my parents just so happened to forgot to lock the door. My mom woke up when he entered, and seeing a tall person in a black hoodie thought he was me, assumedly leaving the room in a depressive episode. And when the hooded figure crouched, that was him realizing his mistake and panicking. He was scared of us. As I got back to the room, my mom walked out and hugs the kid, who is now crying his eyes out. I would be too if a massive ex-soldier was sprinting after me with murder in his eyes. So, to the now traumatized kid from Catalina Island, I look forward to reading your Let's Not Meet of this same event from your perspective. Okay, so this happened when I was around 9 years old. I'm 25 now, and it's something I'll never forget. It gives me goosebumps even till this day. I lived in a terraced house, 4 houses combined, and my neighbors and I each had our own little patio. There's a small road 10 meters from my yard where people do their Sunday walks and so on. Only a small fence separated my yard and patio from that road. I live in a pretty crowded area with several of these terraced houses spread out around my neighborhood. So seeing people walking on that road is pretty normal for me. Seeing random people standing on my patio isn't. When I was 9, I usually got home from school about an hour before my mom got home from work. I lived maybe 50 meters away from school, so my mom figured I was mature enough to be home alone for around an hour before she got home. This one day I got home from school. I did the usual thing, which was to make sure I locked the front door and double-checked that the back door leading to the patio was also locked. I was 9. Being alone was a little scary, even though it was in the middle of the day and only for about an hour. I then rushed to my room upstairs to play as much PlayStation as possible before my mom came home and made me do homework. While I was playing, I heard this noise coming from outside my window. My room was located one floor over the patio, with a view to the road I told you about before. It was kind of like a sound of a cat, but my cat had been missing for over 3 months. Hope sparked, and I thought, oh, it might have came back. I ran downstairs to check if it was my cat, but the sight that met me gives me goosebumps just writing this. There was a guy standing on my patio, a tall guy with black hair covering half of his eyes, making him look like a male version of the Ring woman or something like that. I could hear him making high-pitched noise, almost like a cat meowing. A brown liquid was running down from his mouth, and I could see him spitting out my dad's stomped cigarettes. He was actually eating from the ashtray. I was frozen observing this, eventually snapped out of it and screamed so loud that the man must have heard it. He didn't react. He kept on eating from the ashtray, though. I ran upstairs to my room, locked the door, and called my mom, who then called the cops. I've never been more terrified in my life. I kind of blacked out for a moment because the next thing I remember is the police arriving on the road by my yard. I hear them talking to the guy, saying stuff like, "What are you doing?" Or "Get over here," or "We will come down to arrest you," and so on. He didn't respond, but the high-pitched sounds were more frequent and louder. I decided to look through the window, feeling safe now and that the cops were there. I could see 2 police officers standing by my fence, one man and a woman. I did not see the creepy man, however, because he was standing directly 1 story under me and out of my field of view. The police jumped the fence, and I remember hearing the creepy guy screaming louder than anything I've heard before. He charged the female police officer with full force, and he knocked her out cold. The policeman struggled to keep him on the ground while putting handcuffs on him, but eventually made it. After a while, he managed to wake up the female police officer, who seemed to be badly hurt. He called for backup in an ambulance, and then he sees me standing in the window above him. I started to cry. By this time, neighbors started to arrive, wondering what the hell was going on. One of my neighbors, an elderly woman, made me come down, and she took care of me until my mom came back home. The police took the creepy guy with them in the car and left. Before they left, they promised to come back and talk to us about what had happened. This is where the story takes an unexpected turn. The male police officer came back later that night and sat down with me and my mom to talk. He explained that the guy on my patio was actually diagnosed with severe autism. He had escaped a facility where mentally challenged people lived, located around 5 kilometers from where I lived. He explained that the guy had actually been living in my house 5 years ago, but he had been forced to move when his mom, his only caretaker, died. The poor guy probably thought he would find his mom in my house. He missed the routines, and he missed living there with his mom. The police had to move him from the house that time 5 years ago. Still frightened, I told the police officer that he needed to make sure this would never happen again. He promised it wouldn't. After a few sleepless nights, my life got back to normal. The years went by and the guy didn't come back until about 1 year ago. At this time, my mom and dad had moved out. I bought the house from them, and I'm still living there today. I was enjoying my morning coffee on the patio when I see this random guy stopping on the road by my fence. He just stands there looking at me. I look at him and give him a nod, and then I hear that high-pitched noise again. His hair had turned gray, but the high-pitched sounds made me realize. My heart started racing, and I instantly remembered the reason why he was back. I I realized that I must have managed to escape again because I kept my cool a bit longer than when I was 9. I started to realize how sorry I felt for the guy. 16 years later, he was back looking for his mom. I decided to carefully ask him if he wanted to come down to the patio. He instantly jumped the fence. I started to think he would knock me out like he did to that police officer, but he didn't. He smiled. He looked at me and smiled. I offered him to sit down. He didn't respond. I offered him to come inside. He started laughing. We went inside. His face lit up. Pure joy. He was home. It reminded him of the life he had with his mom. It almost made me tear up. All of a sudden, he sat down on my couch, turned on my TV, and switched directly to the cartoons. I observed him for a while. He was just completely focused on the cartoons. I just wanted him to enjoy the moment, so I didn't say anything to him. I realized I had to call the facility to let them know. The caretakers arrived 10 minutes later. After a lot of convincing, he got back up and crying, and they went back to the facility. I called the facility 2 days later, where we made a deal. His name is Tom, and I now consider Tom my friend. So, every Sunday, from the day he returned, Tom and his caretakers visits me to watch cartoons. They say it's the highlights of his week. For several years, my thoughts were, let's not meet, guy on my patio eating from my ashtray. But now, my thoughts are, let's meet every Sunday to watch cartoons. My dear old friend Tom.